Welcome to another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw. I'm your host, Marc Ruiz Evans. Again, we have one of my favorite colleagues here, Jeremy Zogby of Zogby Polling. We're going to be covering this episode of the Zogby report, which recently, sorry, the humidity here got to me. We're going to be covering this episode of the Zogby Report. It came out recently, episode 99. They're close to their 100th episode coming up. Congratulations. It's called A Breakdown of Everything. Now, one of the key questions that they asked in there was, did Joe Biden do anything to regain control of this national community? But keeping a promise to a colleague, I have to point out this article by the Washington Examiner, Zogby, U.S. overwhelmingly wants less federal meddling, by Paul Bedard, January 7, 22, which talked about the Zogby report. Now, here's the Washington Examiner talking about the Zogby report, and they made sure to call out the questions that Zogby was looking at. Should the Constitution be interpreted strictly to ensure checks and balances are maintained, or loosely to expand the federal government's role in resolving problems? They seem to like you, Jeremy Zogby, and your points about this is a historical debate capturing Jefferson and Hamilton. They also seem to like that you said, or as they interpreted it, 60% chose a strict following of the Constitution versus under 30% who want more government intervention. And this is why I think they really like you, because they went back and then specifically made an action statement for you. Jeremy took a more libertarian view and countered. And then there's this quote. So someone's in love with you over at this place and really like the show. Makes sense to me, because I've been watching you and your dad on the podcast for a while, and I have routinely texted you and emailed you and saying, when you said this, that was a good point. So comments, thoughts, what did you think about the episode you did? What did you think about the way that you were covered by the Washington Examiner? Are they getting out of this context? What was the big takeaway from the episode recently of the Zogby report that you did with you and your dad? Washington Examiner seems to be more focused on a point that wasn't as impressive to me, but what do you think's going on? What did you think of the show?
Yeah, again, it's called Real and Unscripted because that's what it is. I mean, obviously, my dad and I are following the news as much as we can, up to the hour, every hour. So in that sense, we're always prepared, but I don't know what he's going to come in with. And it's always a surprise. So it's really ad lib. I guess the best way to put it is like it's the political version of Curb Your Enthusiasm. If you've ever watched
Yes.
the great show,
Yes.
It's spontaneous. And so it was interesting because I didn't listen to the speech because going back to the Bush presidency, I just kind of started to take states of the unions with a grain of salt. What they say is one thing, but by their deeds you shall know them is the famous example. So instead of going by what they say they're going to do, I rather just follow what they do. So I said to my dad in the show, I said, okay, well, I'm going to admit I didn't listen to it. How is it any different than what he said a year ago? Because I had a suspicion that based on what I heard my dad breaking down, it wasn't any different. And lo and behold, it wasn't. It was a very partisan speech. And Joe Biden walked into office with the presumption of national unity because he kind of made hints to that a little bit, that he was the guy that was going to heal. But no sooner or later, when he was inaugurated, he waged war. And here we are a year later, and it's the same old thing. There will be no national healing under Joe Biden. Even if he wanted to, I don't think the DNC wants to heal. I'm not necessarily saying the Republicans want to either, but looking at the man who's steering the ship, there will be no national healing coming out of him. End of story.
Let me show you a couple other polls. And I know you always correct me on, well, this poll said this, and that's technically different from what we did. So please bring that. Please check me. But let me show you a couple other things that we've seen, and I'll show you the public. So in January 11th to the 13th last year, so 2021, January 11th to the 13th, PBS polling asked voters, do you think that Biden will unite the country? 55% said yes. Now, here's the thing. Biden won about 51, 52%. He only had about 3 more percent of the people that voted for him thinking he could unify the country. 55% is not overwhelming. It's barely over within 3%. And it's like I always like to point out, 3%, 3 to 5 is the margin of error. So the guy got within this margin of error of how he won the election, people saying you could unify the country, barely over half. Now let's fast forward to November. So we went January that year to November that year. January that year to November that year. Total opposite results. 54.2% of likely general election voters asked believe Biden was responsible for the divisions in the American people. Now that's by Trafalgar polling, November 30th, 2021. Obviously, two different agencies. But what I found interesting was one of them at the beginning of the year said 55% basically said Biden's going to unify the country. At the end of that same year, here's another poll saying basically 55% say he's not going to unify the country. So how do we get totally opposite results within the same year? What a difference a year makes. A couple other facts I want to throw in was I never really bought Biden was going to unify the country because he said he wasn't going to. So on April 16th of the year 2020, when he was campaigning and not president, he was asked if he can reach Trump's base, and he said probably not. So Trump's base is around 40% of the voters. So before he was president, April 16th, 2020, Biden said, no, I probably can't reach out to Trump's base. Probably not. Then in June 4th, 2020, he said about 10 to 15% of Americans just aren't very good people. So my question is, if you say that everybody who voted for Trump, you probably can't reach out to them. And if you're knocking off 15% of the American population is not very good, how does that mean that you're going to achieve national unity? I mean, the Trump voting base is 30, 40% of the country. So, Jeremy, that's the first question for you is, you're Joe Biden. You're on the campaign trail. You're not president yet. And you're saying, I probably can't reach out to 40% of the voters. And 15% of the voters are basically garbage and should go in the trash. And then you give a speech about how you're going to do national unity. But last year, you went from a majority of the country saying you could do national unity to the majority of the country saying you can't. How does this look for Joe Biden's ability to bring national unity? And follow-up question, do you think he's sincere given his statements on the campaign trail?
Well, I think he was sincere and honest in saying that he probably wouldn't be able to reach out. I don't know that that's a winning strategy to say that, but I can't deny the fact that he was honest. Now, I mean, regarding the other statement, that was, kind of a few notches down from what Hillary Clinton said in leading up to 2016, calling half the nation a basket of deplorables. He at least reduced it to about 10 to 15%. But I mean, look, this is the way to understand it. If you want to strip down the what is going on in this country, the basic way to understand it is the overarching theme is there's the establishment and there's the anti-establishment. And Joe Biden, make no mistake about it, is a president of, by, and for the Davos, because the Davos crowd have set the agenda of Build Back Better. And they've been able to get a lot of nations around the world to be on board with that. Justin Trudeau, and Angela Merkel, Boris Johnson, and a whole host of others. And Joe Biden is no different. He's on board with Build Back Better. And it's a vision to ultimately radically alter not only American society, but reshape the entire world in the image of a group that are about 1,000 members, basically. And you've got a lot of people who are against that. You've got a lot of people who say that, talking about net zero and all of that's 20, 30, 50 years down the road. I got to put a meal on the table. I got to commute to my job. I'm just not ready to think 20, 30, 50 years down the road, because it's hard for me to basically living paycheck to paycheck. So Joe Biden is the president of the Davos crowd. He's the president of the establishment. And right now we're trying to figure out, is Trump going to be that, anti-establishment person going into 2024, or will someone else emerge? But that's basically how you understand our divide in our nation, and why it's so intense. Two fundamentally different philosophical views.
I remember Joe Biden was asked on the campaign trail about national division. And he said, when I get elected, there will be a national calming. His phrase was national calming, meaning we're going to relax. Trump era's over. I'm going to be reaching out to everybody, and we're going to be coming back together. So you're looking at the polling data, but you also have two eyes and synapses that work inside your head. Do you think in the 2 years that Biden has been president, looking at both on the ground data, you living, and polling data, that he's brought the country back together and there has been a national calming, and the opposition side by Trump has said, you know what, we were wrong. We need to calm down on our beliefs, and we'll throttle it back. Has anybody throttled back? Has there been a calming? Have the Trump people come back to Biden? Or have things gotten only worse in the last 2 years, in your opinion, professionally and personally?
Well, the answer is twofold. No, he hasn't had a calming effect. No, he hasn't signaled that there's going to be a national unity. He may say it here and there, but his actions show otherwise. His actions being that he was going to ram through legislation, the Build Back Better, and went right in for it, and thought that the Democrats had the mandate. And then while we're on that, word mandate, and then pursued national mandates and took these executive orders and mandates, and the media was kind of presenting them that, look, if you don't know it by now, we need to know. An executive order only extends to the staff that you oversee. So when you hear executive order, that doesn't apply to all citizens. That's a legal fact. So, basically there was an agenda, and they ran with the fact that they had the numbers in their favor following the election, and they've kind of failed miserably, because they really tried to ram down the throats of American citizens this these all-encompassing mandates and measures. And so there's been a backfire from, as what we witnessed in November with Virginia going back to Republicans, and New Jersey almost doing the same, almost dumping Governor Murphy, who throughout the duration of the pandemic had, I saw favorable ratings from Governor Murphy, like above 70%. He had, he basically had everybody in New Jersey. He was almost ousted. A bunch of other offices, went back to Republican during that election. And so now here we are, and we're talking about the midterm elections, and the Republicans have the momentum going in, but people are also looking to 2024, and there are some analysts. One in particular is Dick Morris, and I know, he's conservative, but he's the real deal when it comes to strategy and political analysts. When Dick Morris speaks, you listen, okay, regardless of your political background, and he's alluding to the fact that he thinks the Democrats can't run Biden in 2024, because look at his numbers right now. Biden would need a miracle. He would need an absolute miracle to right now, over the next several months, in order to go into 2024 with the comfort that he's going to be the nominee. So that's Biden's situation right now.
And is it fair to say that some of Biden's lack of popularity is to do with the fact that, he promised he was going to get America back in order, a return to decency, a return to normalcy. Things are going to calm down. We're all going to come back together. Well, things aren't calmed down. The divisions are as tense as before. and there has been no national unity. Is it possible that the fact that he promised a lot and didn't deliver on such big existential planks might have something to do with the lack of his popularity, in your opinion?
I think I'm sure that's a factor, but here's where my dad and I agree. And we often disagree more than we agree, but we do agree on some things. And if my dad were here, he would give his thumbs up and say it's true. Probably the biggest reason why the Democrats are hurting nationally and why Biden is, I think, goes beyond the inability to fulfill his promise of national unity, and it's more so because there's an inherent arrogance in the policy and the way they project their policies. The way I describe it is, on the eve or when the November election in Virginia was going on, just 6-8 weeks ago, all eyes were on Virginia, but the backdrop was Glasgow, COP 20 or whatever it is, where basically the big wigs of the world, the global elite, met in Glasgow to discuss their vision for a net carbon-free world. And first of all, the mainstream consensus in the news was that the whole meeting was a blunder. And meanwhile, on the ground in Virginia, parents are being labeled and deemed terrorists because they're doing a fundamental basic right by showing up upset at the school board meetings, whether it was critical race theory that they were upset with or other things, and they were exercising their right, and the FBI were there, and they were scolded. How dare you? You're acting like a domestic terrorist. What I'm saying is that the Democrats have who once were known as the party of the people, have become the party of the academic elite, who think big and talk in wonkish, public policy language, and just do not connect with the average voter who's going on, who's experiencing above average problems. There's a huge disconnect between the way that the leaders in the DNC can communicate to the public and understand what they're going through, and the Republicans are seizing on that. The Republicans are taking a strategy of all politics is local. They're saying, look, people have real concerns about what their kids are learning in school, the material, and the fact that, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, they think it's hateful, that, that they're teaching the curriculums with critical race theory. And of course, there's inflation going on. The prices of, it seems like everything are rising.
There's no inflation. What are you talking about? There's no inflation. Inflation doesn't, stop talking about inflation and it'll just go away.
And then the one last thing I'll say is, and then people are like, they have to face this reality coming soon, where if it hasn't already come to your school district, where they're going to say your child has to have the COVID-19 vaccine in order to attend school. And so there are parents who have real concerns about that. So what I'm saying is the Republicans are taking up the issues that immediately impact the family, immediately impact, like as in this minute, this hour, this day, and tomorrow. And the Democrats are talking about a net carbon-free society by 2050. Who do you think is going to have more success?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we talked about Latinx, and I was very pleased with myself that I called that out a year and a half ago. I was like, who's using this? Where is this coming from? And I remember a lot of my liberal colleagues were like, you're backwards and an ogre for not getting with it. And then it comes out 97% of Latinos don't use that term, and it's being pushed by the Democrats. And you had James Carville go on MSNBC and say, we're losing. You can't go approach people for votes and tell them, I call you this and you better get with that term. And they don't even know what the hell you're calling them. Like, how is that a plan to reach out to Latin voters? And the Latinx thing was exactly what you're talking about. A group of elites pushed something on a group of people and said, we know what's best for you, just accept. And that group of people goes, what?
Do you even understand us?
What?
Right? Do you like them charging back the group of people that is the Hispanics and saying, oh, do you even understand our culture?
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. And, and we had Gavin Newsom out here who won the recall election, but then right after the recall election goes, he was shocked by the lack of Latino support. Well, most Latinos in California are independent contractors, field workers, they're maids, they clean the thing. When Newsom did the economic shutdown, he destroyed their businesses. Then he was shocked that he lost their vote. You clearly don't know these people. So I saw that, and I saw Latinx, and I go, wow, the Democratic Party, just from the little bit I can see, clearly doesn't understand Latinos. And you have Joe Biden saying, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. I can only imagine the amount of understanding and sensitivity to the African-American community that must portray at a high level. Let me show you a couple things real quick. I'll let you go, but I want to get your opinion real quick.
Well, I've got a big thing that I want to, kind of like, I think it's bombshell, but go ahead.
Just real quick, here's Joe Biden telling activists, here's a Latino activist pointed out that you separated kids in cages, and he said, why don't you go ahead and vote for Trump? So Joe Biden told a Latino who was upset about the fact that he started the separation of kids in cages and the concentration camps on the border, go ahead and vote for Trump. That's what Biden said while saying Trump is the evilest thing ever. Then here's Joe Biden recently saying he's fed up with everybody who doesn't want to get a vaccination. That's a huge amount of Americans, including 25% of law enforcement, fire, and military personnel. He said he's fed up with. Then here's Joe Biden saying 10 to 15% of Americans are not very good people. Then here's Joe Biden saying, I probably can't reach out to the Trump people's base. Then here's the Trafalgar poll from last year. Do you think Joe Biden's responsible for the divisions in America? Yeah, over half. That was mentioned here in Newsweek. Finally, we'll go to this poll, which shows earlier in that same year, last year, 55% said, oh, he will unify us. Then it went to 55%, he will not unify us. Well, maybe it's because he says things like this. I just found 4 examples in about 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I wonder how much more he does.
I'll be right back because I got a little situation here. My little boy walked in.
Inexcusable.
Give me 5 seconds here.
Well, we take time for family, and look at how good a dad he is. Look at that attention to his children and the soft touch.
This is also real and unscripted.
Yeah.
So let me tie all of that together, and this ties in exactly to what we've just learned in the last week. But listen, everything I said was important. But if there's one takeaway, this is the takeaway. This is the most important thing. And I'm going to be fair, so I'm not going to blame it all on the Democrats. So let me open up by saying, remember when Trump arrived on the scene and he saw an opportunity? He saw a lot of dismay with the political situation with Obama's second term coming to an end. And he swooped in like the opportunist that he is. And he came out with MAGA. And the Republicans on the ground went nuts. Now, the RNC, they also went nuts, but for a different way. He basically had to get the rest of the party caught up with him. But no doubt about it, Donald Trump saw an in. He was an opportunist, and he successfully capitalized on it. And he won the presidency. And the Democrats went into a toddler-like meltdown. But lo and behold, something happens something's brewing in December of 2019, and then something happens in January 2020, coronavirus. And the Democrats jumped on that. And that is essentially what led to the ascendancy of what we saw in 2020, the Biden presidency. What's happening now is they're losing control of the narrative. Everything that you just went on, pretty much everything is basically the loss of the narrative. It's kind of like a behind the scenes losing control and freaking out and desperately trying to maintain the narrative. And then what has happened in the last week, which I'm going to reveal if you haven't heard it, even proves that further. First, we learn the CDC says this was the PCR testing, the PCR test. They basically say it's not reliable. The PCR is the pillar of the pandemic coronavirus COVID-19 narrative, because it's the very instrument that's telling us we have hundreds of millions of cases around the world. We have 30 million cases in the United States. And lo and behold, the CDC says that testing mechanism, it's faulty, okay? Then it came out a study, and this was a few days ago, saying that all of the hospitalizations, or all of the coronavirus cases in New York State, well, a lot of those had other symptoms or comorbidities. That means that the people didn't go into the ER from COVID. They went into the ER with COVID. They went in maybe with appendicitis. They went in with a broken leg. They went in with cancer, heart attack, whatever. And then, oh, by the way, they were tested. It showed up positive. That's a COVID case. Remember, the CDC just said a week ago that the PCR is faulty. Now, Walensky from the CDC and Fauci have come out within 48 hours saying the same exact thing. Walensky said in the situation of adult cases and adult deaths, it's comorbidities, at least half of them. So in what that translates to is that these cases and deaths are being inflated because of the faulty PCR test. Fauci says the same thing on MSNBC. There is a loss of the narrative. The narrative is falling apart. And it seems like the Democrats they're scrambling. And so I don't know what happens from here, but this is a very serious situation. And I'm watching it very closely to see what's going to come out of it. It's too soon for me to say, oh, I think XYZ is going to happen, but that should really be the news of the year. No question about it.
Do you actually think they're losing control of the narrative on COVID-19? Because they've had it on lock for about a year and a half. So if what you're saying is true, I could see how that would be gigantic and earthquake ramification like, because they've had this on lock, zero questioning. If you question, you are a bad person and you hate science and you want people dead and you're selfish and you're a horrible monster and you hate science and you're ignorant and you're probably a flat earther. And then now, for example, I saw Fauci last week admit, yeah, if you gunshot wound to the head and COVID-19, we listed you as a COVID-19 death. I had friends say that for a year and a half, and they were banned and had their professional reputations destroyed, and they were removed completely from social media, and they have not had their social media accounts reactivated, even though Fauci admitted this week that that was true. And my question to most of my friends is, if Fauci said this is not true for the last year and a half and now says it's true, why should we believe him? And the thing that I find interesting is that most of the people who are super ardent, Fauci's right, we're doing the right thing, had no idea he said that or admitted that at all last week.
He's basically, let's boil it down simply. Right now, the data shows that there's 800,000 deaths due to COVID-19. Now Fauci is saying, no, that's not accurate. A lot of those people who died, they tested positive for COVID-19, but they died of other causes. Because if I go in, if I have a heart attack right now, right, and my left arm goes numb, or if I have a stroke and one side of my face, paralyzes, and then I go to the emergency room, and then they say, well, you know what, while we're at it, let's test him because we're concerned. We just want to be on top of things. There's a pandemic.
Sure.
Oh, he tested positive for COVID-19. Then I die. It's labeled a COVID-19 death. Right. I did not go into the ER with a cough or with anything respiratory or a high fever. I went in with a stroke. That is happening by the hundreds of thousands, which means the 800,000 number is meaningless. We have to call that into question, and that's not theory. That's what Fauci is telling us.
Exactly. So, hey, folks, the tests work. Anybody saying the tests don't work, you're a monster. You have to be destroyed and banned. Whoops, we admit the tests don't work. Okay. Hey, folks, if you said we're masking COVID deaths, then you're a liar and a horrible person. Hey, folks, a year and a half later, turns out that's exactly what we did. So that's two things where they lied. I mean, they just straight up lied and shut people down who said that, and then they admit it's true. And again, this is just me personally. I haven't done a poll, but in my personal life, every single person that I've talked to wasn't aware that Fauci admitted those things recently. So if I went around going, here's this right-wing talking point, they would have nodded their head. And it wasn't until I said Fauci said it, and then I had to say, and he said it on MSNBC. So it wasn't, you had to say Fauci said it, and you had to say it wasn't reported on Fox. It was Fauci on MSNBC. And then they'll agree to it. But then it's just kind of like blank stare, like, oh, okay. Folks, I work in government for 18 years, and this is well established. In a crisis, you have to have trust of the public. You cannot lie to them on big things and then say, let's have trust. And I was arguing with a colleague last night who told me about the reason why America was so great in World War II was that it was honest with the people in the midst of the worst crisis America had faced. So the American president and generals, yeah, they lied a little bit, but they wouldn't lie about the way the war was going. At the beginning of the war, it wasn't going so great. They'd tell the American people the truth. Now in Nazi Germany and Japan, they'd lie about it and everything was a win. So when the Americans were actually winning, the people believed them and they came together as a unified country. I know Roosevelt wasn't completely true, but there was generally some truth telling about we're in this together, we're going to fight this battle. And that helped keep trust and keep cohesion and kept the pressure on and the American people united through that epidemic. Now we have another emergency. And imagine FDR just goes, yeah, telling one big lie right after another. And then 2 years in, he goes, but still believe me, and we're going to defeat Hitler and Tojo. The American people probably wouldn't have done it because they didn't have trust in their officials. So how are we supposed to get through this emergency when our officials have outright lied to us? And trust in officials is key throughout history for any society getting through an emergency. How do we pull that off?
Well, essentially, they're telling us the emergency isn't as much of an emergency as they initially said it was. I'm not making that up because if you're telling me that 50 to 75% of the cases and deaths are not, then it's basically anywhere from 50 to 25% lower. It's a major problem. So that's why I say that there's the narrative right now is falling apart. I'm not, I can't make a prediction that, that all of the public or a majority of the public are then going to say, be out in the streets, a la John Lennon saying the pandemic is over if you want it to be, right? He said war is over if you want it to be. I don't know what's going to happen, but it seems like they're scrambling. And what you showed me, from the articles, what Biden was saying reminded me of kind of like the damage control that Walensky and Fauci are doing right now. And so I tied it together because the Democrats essentially, look, COVID was a major reason why they were able to get elected. And so now if that narrative is in trouble and being contradicted by the very people who were upholding it, it looks like it's imploding. And so what do the Democrats then pivot to? What's their rally? What's their, our leadership is proven?
Russian boogeyman? I mean, that worked pretty well. Bring that old back. People love classics and sequels. Bring it back, Putin 2.0, maybe put like a cyborg mask on him and say like he's even more evil. I'll
tell you what. Now all eyes are on Kazakhstan, and there are many different angles to I've just, in the little bit that I've read, there's many different stories, but I don't want to speak too soon, but anytime I see a national media jump on a country and saying, look, they're ready to revolt, they're ready to overturn the regime, overthrow the regime, we should help them. Look at Ukraine, look at Syria, look at just look at any of the color revolutions in the last 20 years. It doesn't look good.
Yeah. I mean, not to get too far off on it, but the first thing when they said Kazakhstan was following, I thought, well, it affected Bitcoin. So if somebody doesn't like Bitcoin, instigating instability in that country would be a good way to do that. A lot of countries are, and banking systems are threatened by Bitcoin because it's a rival to currency. 20%, I think, of Bitcoin was in Kazakhstan, and
Oh,
the
wow.
price of
I didn't know
Bitcoin
that.
dramatically dropped after that. So I can't prove any of that, but I'm just saying there's a lot of big players who would love to see Bitcoin get hurt. The Kazakhstan unrest absolutely did that. The other thing is that if we look at America, they tried to cut off Russia strategically from their Sebastopol seaport with Ukraine. That's why Russia acted aggressively to secure that. Well, Baikonur is the main spaceport for Russia in Kazakhstan. Is it a coincidence that we have a revolution at a key infrastructure point outside of the Russian landmass 2 years ago in Syria, and now we have another revolution coincidentally around another key piece of infrastructure slightly outside of Russia, again, with America saying, let's back the freedom fighters. You know, when you look at the accusations that can't be proven, that a lot of these revolutions are backed by the CIA and are just there to cause instability, it kind of adds up. We can't attack Russia, but we can start taking things that are important to them outside of their national borders and removing control. So now they can't launch spaceships, and now they can't launch ships, and then now they can't do credit currency counseling, and then now they can't ship gas. So I'm just noticing a pattern. Can't prove anything, but the CIA, folks, was the group of people that went around to Latin democracies in the 50s and 60s and shot people in the head so that American corporations could make more money. So let's remember who we're talking about. These are also the same people that lied to you about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and somehow didn't pay attention to 19 Saudi terrorists learning how to fly a plane without knowing how to land, which resulted in 9/11. So do we trust them? Is this a good group of people to really put our backing into? I'm kind of still upset about you knocked over almost every Latin American country and shot those people in the head and never apologized. And a lot of those people are still in charge. John Negroponte, who oversaw the death squads in Latin America under Reagan, is still employed, worked in the Iraq War, and was saluted by Hillary Clinton on the campaign trail as someone she was proud to know. So let's get it real. A lot of Latin people got clipped and murdered, and those people are still in charge and still running things and still work for the CIA. And I'm supposed to believe it's just a do-gooder organization with nothing but democracy in its heart and no other inclinations there at all. Yeah, it just happens to strategically weaken Russia, but that's just a coincidence. Let's not really look into that.
Well, you know more than I do, so you broke it down. So
just saying. Russia.
But listen, is there anything because I gotta
Oh,
jump
you gotta go.
on.
No, I
Well,
think
no. Is there anything that I can end with, or you let me know?
Yes. Do you think, is this a worthwhile topic to study the continuing dissolution of America? Is this a fluke? Is it something that could happen? Or is it just overblown? We've looked at the last 2 years of data showing this is continuing to get worse. And there's polls showing Biden is not pulling it together. And the division in America is the worst it's been since the 1860s. So I'm always running up against people going, this is overblown. People are going to calm down. America's been through worse. They'll come together. Is this a topic worth studying? Is this a real issue? Or is it just flash in the pan? You've looked at the numbers. What do you think?
Politically speaking, the only thing that could calm us down is some wild card candidate. Now, when I say third party, I don't necessarily mean that they form a third party, but that they present themselves as like a third party candidate from within the two parties, right? Donald Trump was kind of that. He was essentially like a third party candidate, but he was a firebrand and he was a demagogue. He played on the emotions and manipulated the emotions of people. But can we get the opposite of that, firebrand person who, instead of further intensifying the divisions, can get 60% or 65 or, I don't know, and I don't think that can happen, but that would be something that would be able to calm us down politically, would be unity. The question is who's going to do that and who can do that. But regardless of that, even if that does or doesn't happen, you still have the backdrop of the economy, and you have we're on the precipice, or we may already be there, 70s style, inflation, and the economy is just, these lockdowns have destroyed the supply chain, and now we have to wonder, it probably was unnecessary. It was probably very unnecessary, and then now we have inflation, and so that stuff. Economics, the pressure that's happening there, that can boil over and then make the politics even worse. So I don't think it's going to get better unless we get people in who are willing to address the real problems, and like inflation, and hey, look what Sweden did. They didn't lock down. They said, we're going to recommend you do this and you do that. But we're not going to throw you in jail, and we're not going to fine you thousands of dollars. Hey, they emerged from this whole thing with probably among the least casualties, and a society that largely remained intact. So that's the only way we're going to get out of this mess, is with sensible solutions. And I would really look no further than Sweden. So I'll close like that.
Okay. And one last question. What if this national unifier, Christ-like figures coming around, pulling everybody together, but then the base says, did you just say that Trump people are decent humans and fellow Americans? Ooh, gross. Now I hate you. How far would they get?
Well, then we'd be back to square one.
Okay. Just asking. Thank you very much. As always, I'll see you soon. Thank you for checking in.
Thank you for having me on again. Take care. I have to remind people, the Zogby Report, real and unscripted, and nobody's doing what we're doing. We're not pretty production-wise, not at all. It's the content and the backdrop that is two different generations, two different viewpoints, able to talk civilly with each other. And I don't really think that's being done anywhere else in any other podcast. So thanks again.
It's not. No one else is covering these issues in depth because they're scared to do controversy, whereas you and your dad will actually go into the controversy and explains what it is. The other polling agencies want to do their poll, ship it off, and not be seen as part of the controversy. You guys will actually do the poll and do the controversy, and you're not afraid to deal with the aggression that comes from the public to do it. So from what I've seen, no one's doing that. I'll completely back you on that.
Well, thank you. That's very kind.
Okay.
Take care.
Give me that $20 later after the show, okay?
Sorry?
Give me that $20 later after the show.
Okay.
That was a joke. No, that was a real compliment. All right. I'll see y'all later. Thank you.
Yep. Bye.